Hello and welcome to another live episode of the Leveraging AI podcast, the podcast that shares practical, ethical way to leverage AI to improve efficiency, grow your business, and advance your career. This is Isar Meitis, your host, and we have a topic today that is really dear to my heart. I've always been, through my entire career as a senior executive, a data freak. I always wanted to know what's happening in my businesses and how can I make better data-driven decisions in my businesses. The business company that I run was Last Minute Travel. I had an amazing team in Last Minute Travel. And when we started building our technology platform, the first thing we did is to build a data management system that allows us to capture data from multiple siloed sources that we had in the business before and bring them all together so we can understand exactly what's happening across the entire business. Back then, that was very unique and almost nobody had something like this, but it helped us really grow the business from 20 million to 100 million in a few years, just because we could understand exactly what's happening in every aspect of our business and just make better decisions on daily and hourly basis on conversion and traffic and costs and execution of different aspects and creation of code and deployment of code. Literally every aspect of our business was monitored and we could see exactly what's happening and we could make better decisions. So my personal experience, as well as now as a consultant with different companies, having the right data is half the battle, but then knowing how to analyze the data to actually get insights that can support the business is the different half of the data. And that's going to be our topic of today's episode. We're going to dive into how to use the data that we have in the business right now in order to make better business decisions and to get the insights that we need in order to make these decisions. Now, I will say that many companies have data that they're not using. And you're like, they're not using it, or they're using it in a limited way for several different reasons. Reason number one is some people are just lazy and say, okay, we have these reports and we have these dashboards in the tools and it gives us enough information and we're good with that. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is that people just don't know what insights they can get from the data. And so they're limited with where they can go with that. Reason number three could be that the data is siloed in different places. So they have some data in the sales department, some data in marketing, some data in HR, some data in finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they have no means of combining it together. Reason number four, while people are not making the most out of the data, is they know the insights, they have the data, but they just don't have the in-house skills. Sometimes those in-house skills are as basic as we have somebody who is an Excel whiz who knows how to put stuff together, but in many cases, that's not even enough. And some businesses don't even have that. But in some cases, that's not enough, because to go beyond, like when I was running Last Minute Travel, I had a data scientist and even a senior and a junior data scientist working and analyzing data and running through the information that we had on top of that infrastructure that we built. And so if you don't have that, you're still limited with what you can do. But AI actually comes to solve all of these things. So how do we solve these kind of problems? Now, before we dive into that, if you're in here with us live, either on Zoom or on LinkedIn, please come and share who you are, what you're doing, where you're from, and so on, so you can get more benefits out of it, in addition to just listening to me talk about data and how you can make better decisions. Let's get started with some data analysis and knowledge that you can gain. So in ChatGPT, there are amazing capabilities to do data analysis. Now, the truth is you can do this in multiple tools, but the trick is how can you do this in the most efficient way, and how can you do this in the most valuable way possible? And what I mean by that is Gemini knows how to analyze data. Claude knows how to analyze data. ChatGPT knows how to analyze data, and some of the other tools as well. Some of them do better than others. Now, the question you need to ask yourself first and foremost is what kind of insights you're trying to get. And then once you understand those insights, what do you want the output to be, right? The output could be a dashboard. The output could be a chart. The output could be a report. The output could be a fancy report that includes charts and graphs and text and everything. So it really depends, and you got to know all these things in order to decide exactly what you want to do. And so once you have that, you can then identify what is it that you're trying to get from the data. And one of the cool things with ChatGPT is that because you're running within not a traditional data analysis environment like Power BI or one of those. You're actually running within a chat that can understand the context and understands the conversation and understands the process. You can actually do much more interesting things than you could do otherwise if you are just using a standalone platform. So what I want to show you as a very first step is how you can take raw data and in ChatGPT, convert it into a very detailed report on any topic that you want. Now, that particular report that I'm going to show you right now is going to be about how to create a analysis of a publicly traded company, but you can do the same exact thing with any data that you have. You can do it with sales data, you can do it with marketing data, you can do it with HR data, literally whatever you want. So let's look at this. So what we're going to start now is, first of all, I'm going to show you ChatGPT, and we're going to walk through a very long and interesting process on how to go from numeric data in a table to a very detailed report. What I want to show you, in addition to the report itself, is I want to show you that the report itself is like a 30-page report with graphs and charts. And for those of you who are listening, will not be able to watch this, but for those of you who are not listening and can watch this, after we're done, I will show you the actual report. But what did I start with? So you can start with several different data sources. The right one to start with is starting with a CSV file. Why do you want to start with a CSV file? And is the fact that a CSV file, different than Excel, is actually not as heavy as an Excel file. So what you want to start with is you want to start with a CSV file. Why CSV and not XLSX? For several different reasons, but the main reason is that AI tools, all of them, ChatGPT included, can read CSV files a lot easier than they can read all the other stuff. When you're creating a CSV file to drop it into ChatGPT, there are best practices that you need to follow in order to make the best out of it. The very first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that the formatting is as simple and plain as possible. As humans, we like creating tables that have different colors, that have subtotals every quarter, that have a gap as a blue line between Q1 and Q2 that is actually a column in the Excel that we color in blue. We like to add 3 different tables on the same page because it allows us to see different things all together. We add 3 different headlines. Headline 1 is quarter, that merges 3 cells together. Underneath that you have months, and underneath that you have weeks. And so there's 3 different headers for everything, and so on and so forth. And for us humans, it's very easy to read that and follow. For the AI, it's really, really confusing. So the best practices is have one header line. If you need to include the quarter and the month, then put the first cell as Q1-January, then Q1-February, then Q1-March, etc., and so on and so forth. Merge your cells. Do not put any totals, and definitely do not put any subtotals in the middle of either the rows or the columns, because that confuses the AI as well. It will add that as just another number and it will throw away your results. Make sure that you're using consistent formatting, meaning don't use a number in one cell and a text in a different cell. Each column should have the same formatting across the entire column or across the entire row, so the AI knows how to read it in the most efficient way. And if you are using a multiple tab Excel file, if you save it as a CSV, each and every one of those tabs needs to become its own CSV, because CSV has just one page. So you need to export each and every one of them separately as a CSV and then upload all of them to ChatGPT. So that's just best practices to get good, consistent results. What I've done here is actually something a little different. I've started with a publicly traded company, and I went to their website, and their website actually has their financial analysis that looks like this. And you can see that it's just a regular standard financial analysis information that they have on their website, but I couldn't find a CSV file to download. I'm sure if I worked very hard, I could have done that. But the cool thing about ChatGPT and all the other tools as well is that you can take a screenshot, which is what I've done, and then I've uploaded to ChatGPT and I said, please turn the data into a table we can analyze. And then it created a table in the same exact formatting with the same exact data in it. And it's actually very good at doing that. So if you've never done this before, literally now, every time I need to move information from one place to the other, I take a snapshot, either a screenshot or with my phone, and I ask ChatGPT to convert it to data, either text or tables or whatever I need, and it does a fantastic job every single time. So then I have a table of data, and I have, Q1, Q2, this year, that year, total revenue, cost of revenue, gross profit, operating expense, operating income, all the financial data that exists in a standard P&L of a company. and with different years and with trailing 12 months in this particular case. Like I said, this could be any data that you have in your company. And then I went ahead and gave it the first prompt. You're an expert financial analyst, and I need your assistance in reviewing the performance of this company. Please let me know what are the key insights you can see in the data. So the way I like to start every time I bring data into ChatGPT is to give it a very broad, general question. I usually ask what information you can find in the data and what general insights I can get. I do this for two reasons. Reason number one is it allows me to understand that ChatGPT understands the data. Reason number two is that it helps me in getting ideas, because sometimes it will have ideas that I don't, and then I can see what it gives me as a suggestion. Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. That would be great to know this thing. So I always start with that. So the answer that I got is actually a pretty good start to the analysis. So it says, okay, revenue and gross profit trends. Revenue rose from 526,000 in fiscal year 2020 to 578,000 in fiscal year 2022, but dipped in 2023, and gross profit and key takeaways. And then it went to operating expenses and operating income with a few bullet points on that, and then large negative in 2022. So it basically told me there was a large dip in 2022. The data shows stark swing to a net loss in fiscal year 2022, losing $31 million compared to profit and all the other ones. And the same year, 2022, the total unusual items were 48 million. So this is like one of the things that happened. Then it talks about recovery of net income and earning per share in 2023 and 2024, and interest and expense and leverage considerations and EBITDA fluctuations. A really great report that I didn't have to ask for any specific details. It just gave me the report. And you can do that, like I said, with any data that you give it. It's just a general start. And then I said, okay, I'm very curious. This is me prompting. I'm very curious about the one-time large negative in 2022. These results are for a publicly traded company called Superior Group Companies, SGC. Can you access their 2022 10K? So the beauty about doing this kind of analysis in ChatGPT is that it has access to the internet, and I can ask it to go and grab additional information. So it did, and it helped me identify what are the reasons. So it went and got their 10K, their actual reports from the SEC, and he was able to identify what were the issues. So then I gave it a specific link to their 10K and the information in it, and then it pulled information. It still had issues with understanding some of the data, so I downloaded the 10K as a PDF and I uploaded it, and then it found the answer. And it gave me a very detailed reasoning what's the data in there. I also asked it to provide me with citations of where it found the data. So what I'm looking at right now, I'm going to read to you that are just listening. It says, summary of reason, decline in fair value due to market conditions, cash flow decline, and stock price decrease. And then there's a detailed actual explanation that is a quote from the 10K. So I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I'm going to read a short segment of it. It says, in conjunction with the resegmentation during the second quarter of 2022, the company performed a goodwill impairment analysis and determined that the estimated fair value of previous uniforms and related products, blah, 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 blah. And it tells me, because I asked it to, on the next column, it says it's page 28, section called goodwill impairment charge. Why am I sharing all of this with you? If you are giving it information, ask for specific quotes from the original information and ask for the reference, the page and the section it had taken the information from. That is true not just when you're doing data analysis, that is true even if you're writing summaries or anything else, because it will allow you to very quickly verify that the information that you got is correct. All I have to do is to go to page 28 in that section and find that segment, and I can do it with a command F because I have the exact quote from that section. So it helped me find all of that information. And then I said, okay, great, thank you. I would like you to help me with creating some graphs. Let's start with a line graph of the total revenue year over year, including the TTM. So it did that. So it did a graph that I'm looking at right now. Again, those of you not listening, it's just showing revenue over time on the x-axis, including the trailing 12 months as the last number. Then I ask it about more specific stuff, and I give it more information. And then I asked for another graph that was very interesting to me. So please create a graph of the total revenue compared with a graph of the operating expenses, because it felt like they're not growing in the same pace. And it did. It created the graph for me. Now, then it was still not very, very clear. So because they're very different from one another, one line, the revenue is very high and the operating expenses are relatively low. So I asked it to create a ratio between them. Again, that's a parameter that doesn't exist. So I prompted it to please create a graph that shows the ratio of operating expenses compared with total revenue. And what we can see in this graph that from 2020 to 2023, and then continuing in the trailing 12 months, the ratio grew from 0.26 to 0.35. A very big jump in operating expenses over those few years. That's data that is not obvious unless you can literally ask a question and get a graph in front of you. Now I'm going to scroll down and there's more and more and more information, and I created subsets of tables and I asked it to go and get the current trading value of the stock. And it actually, ChatGPT knows how to present it in a live graph that you can move your cursor over and actually see 1 day, 5 days, 1 month, because it's pulling the data in real time from the stock market. So you can see that in the report as well. And I created a lot of other graphs and bars and so on. But then gets the interesting part. How do you turn all of this into an actual helpful report? So the prompt was, you are an expert data analyst with 15 years of experience in writing reports about publicly traded companies. I would like you to tell me what the outline should include in a report about the company we just reviewed, which is SGC. The target audience are senior business executives with knowledge in this company. The report needs to cover the basics, but also provide unique insights that may not be obvious. Please take your time, review the information again, and let me know what should be in the outline. I would like you to cover the topics that I asked about, plus additional things that it suggests. And it created a beautiful outline that includes an executive summary, business overview, financial performance, operating expenses, profitability trends, stock performance, deep dive in 2022. So the things that I asked about in the beginning, it has like 3 or 4 bullet points in that, balance sheet and capital structure, industry market positioning, all of that on its own. Like, it created a great overview. What I asked it to do then is I asked it to create this in Canvas. So Canvas, it allows you to then see the response in a way that is editable by you. So if you open a Canvas, and those of you who don't know, Canvas opens a side-by-side kind of environment in ChatGPT. You create it by either asking it to write something, and when it does it, you can literally just ask it to open it in Canvas. So when you open Canvas, it allows you to see it on the right and continue the chat on the left. And the other benefit of it is that you can edit the document that is in Canvas, and you can ask questions and add information in specific segments. So this is what I did afterwards. I literally highlighted in Canvas section after section. And when you highlight it, you can ask ChatGPT to relate to just that section. And then I asked for more and more details in specific topics until I had the full report. The one more thing that I added that I really love doing when I create these kind of reports is I asked ChatGPT to create a placeholder for each and every one of the graphs that we created before. So ChatGPT in Canvas, and by the way, none of the other tools, knows how to put the graphs inside the text that it's generating. So it's generating a fantastic report that has multiple pages and is formatted perfectly, that you can work with collaboratively. You can go and change information. You can add your own text. You can highlight specific sections and add for additional information about that section. So you're slowly building a deeper and deeper, more and more detailed report. But then you don't have the graphs. So what I'm asking it to do is I'm asking it to put placeholders for the graph. So you can see here, because of the prompt, it says visual line graph showing the revenue decline across segments for 2023. And then in square brackets, which is what I ask it to do, it gives me the name of the chart that shows up in the regular chat. So on the left side where I have the chat, if I'm looking now at one of the graphs, you can see it has a name, and I ask it to put the name in square brackets as a placeholder where it needs to go. So the only thing I need to do afterwards is to actually go to a regular Word document. And if I click on that, you will see the final report. This now after I export it into PDF, but all I have to do is get the report, add a header, add a footer, and add a table of contents and everything else. And I'm going to show you now this is like 14 pages long, and it has all the information that we had before, plus the graphs that I had to manually paste in the right place. But it was very easy for me to do because all I have to do, it tells me what's the name of the graph. I have to look for it in the original chat, copy, paste it into the report, save it as a PDF. And a work that used to take a team of researchers a few days to create, I can now create in probably 20 to 30 minutes. Now, I can do the same thing with any other kind of report that I want. I can do this, like I said, with financial reports, with HR, peer reviews, with marketing data from multiple systems and combine it together. We talked about some of the limitations that we have as far as siloed data in companies. This solves that. So one of the use cases that I did with one of my clients, we're trying to analyze the actual cost of specific clients versus the revenue from specific clients. So the revenue lives in one system. Most of the cost actually comes from customer service, which lives in another system. And there was no way for them to combine it together. And literally all we had to do is export the data from both systems, drop two CSV files into ChatGPT and ask questions. And then you get a comparison of the revenue versus the amount of customer service you do per client, which tells you the real overhead of that client compared to how much revenue they're generating, which allows you, again, going back to insightful information, to segment your customer service to different tiers like platinum, gold, and silver, and then give them different level of support based on their revenue that they're driving to the business or the profitability they're driving to the business, which is not easy to figure out unless you have either a data scientist or a tool like this that is basically a data scientist in a box. And the reason I'm saying that, if we go back to ChatGPT, the way ChatGPT is doing all these things is it's actually creating the code to run each and every one of these prompts. So when I'm creating a prompt in ChatGPT and asking it to create a table or a segment or anything, what it's actually doing is it's actually writing code to make it happen, which allows me to, if you know how to write code, which allows you to go and see what's the code and how it's doing it. But in addition, it allows it to be accurate, which is more important, because instead of ChatGPT and all these tools are not great at math, by the way. They're not great at math because they are statistical models. They get it 95% correct, which in doing math is not a good idea. But what they're actually doing here is they're writing Python code in order to get the results. So this is ChatGPT, but let's say we wanted to go a step further. Let's say in addition to just doing data analysis, I wanted to do something more interesting. So I was looking to another use case, and that use case actually came to my mind because Google came out with a new tool, or actually with a release of an existing tool with updates. And that tool is called Colab. And what is Google Colab? Google Colab is a way for people with data analyst experience to create very detailed reports without infrastructure. So it's basically data analyst infrastructure in the cloud that you don't need to know how to install. You don't need to run it locally and so on. You can go ahead, drop your data in, and it knows how to do everything in the back end as far as the infrastructure, as far as setting up databases and calls and APIs and all these kind of things. This was a great tool for data analysts, but not necessarily for people like me, because I don't write a single line of code. I don't know how to do that. But what they added last week is the ability to prompt the tool to write its own code, which is really cool. So what I wanted to try is a use case I couldn't do in ChatGPT. One of the things that I thought of is, let's say I want to start a business that serves gyms in my area, and it provides them whatever, either support to fix their gear or the actual equipment itself or anything else that gym may need. Now, I wanted to make it interesting, so I tried it first in ChatGPT. I said, what if I go to ChatGPT and I try to create this thing? So let's look at ChatGPT. To do that, I need to know what are the gyms in my area, right? So let's say my business is in this zip code, 32802, which is somewhere in Orlando. And let's say that I want to know what gyms are in the area. So I said, okay, create a table with names, addresses, and lat long of all the gyms within 20 miles radius from the center of this zip code. And it created this, but it's really bad. And it's really bad because it gives me like 7 gyms out of a lot more that are out there. And what it did, this is actually, I did it with several different models. I also did it with the reasoning models. And what it's basically telling me in the reasoning models is I don't have real-time data access to this. So I'm going to try to do my best, but I'm telling you in advance, it's going to be a limited kind of information. Okay, that's not great. So that's definitely not all the gyms in that area. So how can I solve this? So now let's look at Colab. Colab looks like a very geeky environment, but don't be alarmed when we look at it, because I will show you exactly how it works. And the way it works is all I had to do is I had to open Colab, and I had to go, and it's like everything in Google. It's colab.research.google.com, and then you go to File, and you create a new notebook, or whatever they call it, new notebook. And I created a new notebook, and then all I had to do is prompt it. And the prompt that I wrote is create a table with names, addresses, lat longs, exactly the same thing I wrote to ChatGPT. But what it did is it wrote code to connect to Google Maps API. And it asked me to get an API key, which was a little scary in the beginning because I didn't know how to do that. But after about 5 minutes on YouTube, I got an API key. And what it did is then it queried Google Maps to get this data. And then instead of getting the 5 that I got before, I got 59 gyms. And then it got all the information for all these gyms and it put it in a very ugly user interface, which is not very helpful to me. So I wrote in a prompt, I said, can you create this as an interactive table? So then it wrote code to put it in a table that actually makes sense and look like humans would want to look at. So now I have different columns. I have an index, which is basically gym number 1, 2, 3, 4. It has the name, it has the address, it has the latitude and longitude. And the reason I wanted those is for the final step, which we'll get to in a minute. So the same kind of exercise could be for any brick and mortar business. You want to know how many schools are in your area. You want to know how many people live in your area. You want to know whatever you want to know as far as geographical data. This knows how to get because it knows how to write a code to go and connect to third-party APIs and get the data. So then I said, okay, this is cool, but let's say that I don't want to work with large chains like LA Fitness and Planet Fitness because they already have that solution in-house. They don't need me. So what I asked it to do, and I literally just clicked a button and said, can you embed this as a Google Sheets in the same work environment? And it did. And the cool thing that it did is 2 things. First of all, I now have Google Sheets in Colab. So I don't have to go to Google Sheets, but it also gives me a link that I can open this as a regular Google Sheets and work in a regular Google Sheets, but it feeds into my notebook. But again, the fact that it knows how to do it here is really, really cool. So now I have this in Google Sheets. Now, I don't know how to write code, but I know how to use Google Sheets. So what I did in Google Sheets is I literally wrote a simple formula that will tell me if the name of the gym is Planet Fitness or LA Fitness. And it will say yes or no, depending on a simple search, like something that every person hopefully knows how to do in Google Sheets. So now I ask it to take the data from Google Sheets. And again, I did this by prompting it. I said, get the data from the interactive sheet. And then it updated its own database. So now you can see that in its own database, that is, again, this ugly format, it actually added this additional column that I added in Google Sheets. This whole process took me about 10 minutes, including figure out the API. Now where the real magic happens. So now I have a table that is active in Google Sheets that is integrated into a data scientist environment that is working with prompts. And my next prompt was using this data, create a Google Maps to display all of these gyms, highlighting the ones that are not large chains in green. And it wrote a piece of code and it created the map that is 20-mile radius from where my made-up office or warehouse is, with green and blue dots on the map that shows me the gyms that I want to serve, or maybe where I would want to open my next location based on this research, or so on and so forth. My next step, which I'm not going to show you, but I'm going to talk about what you can do, I can now ask it, because it has API to Google Maps, to create the best routes to cover 15 gyms per day in the most optimal way, so I don't waste gas and time and money. And it will give me a different route every single day to cover different gyms every single day of the week. So in 5 days, I can cover all these gyms in the most effective way. And it will write code and it will do that for me. And it will give me the navigation for each and every one of these gyms. This is nothing short of magic in my eyes, because it allows you to do stuff that regular data scientists would take a while to do. And you can do this without being a data scientist. Now, yes, you need to be a little bit geeky. And yes, sometimes it writes the code and it fails. And I will show you examples. But what happens when it fails to do the code, and you can see an example here, it tells you, okay, do you want an explanation of what is the problem? And you say yes. And then it opens another sidebar and it explains what's the problem. It said, do you want me to fix the problem? Yes. And then it creates a new piece of code that you can then deploy into the other side, not knowing anything about what the code does, because I don't know anything, and then keep on going until you make it work. Summary of what we discussed today that I find to be absolutely incredible. One is data is what drives businesses. If you know what's happening in your business across more and more aspects of the business, and you can go deep, you can make better decisions. Making better decisions will drive better results for the business. The hard part is knowing how to analyze the data. These two, and then actually doing the actual analysis. What I showed you today is 2 different options on how to take different kinds of data. Some of it is internal data, some of it external data, like the locations data, and bring them into data analysis tools that are either free or almost free, that you can use at scale to do stuff that previously was impossible to do unless you had a data scientist in-house. And even then, they probably have limited bandwidth and they can't do everything. And in the same amount of time that will take you to write an email to your data scientist to explain what you need, you can actually do the analysis itself in ChatGPT. Just get the CSV file, follow the best practices that I shared initially, and drop it into ChatGPT and then just ask questions. It will generate analysis, subsets of the table, new columns to the table that do really sophisticated math to get to them, create bars, charts, whatever you need. And then you can even ask it to write a report for you that you can just copy and paste into a tool. Or if you want to go a step deeper, use a tool like Colab that you can prompt to do stuff that brings external data. Plus, you can obviously drop your own data. You can still take a CSV file, and I've done that as well. You can take a CSV file, drop it into Colab, and say, analyze this, and it will write its own code and do things and give you answers. What I found in that particular use case, that ChatGPT does a better job, so you get better outcome because it understands the context. It's not just asking it to do a specific type of code. It understands what you're trying to do in ChatGPT, which Colab doesn't. So you can do very geeky things in Colab, but as far as analyzing just a CSV file, ChatGPT will get you better results faster and with less hassle. So if that's your use case, go to ChatGPT and use it over there. That's it for today. I hope this was helpful. I can tell you for myself, I use this all the time with whether my own data or when I'm working with different clients. I will have to say one thing before we go. You have to know that if you're not using a paid account of ChatGPT and you're asking them not to train on your data, then they will train on your data. Meaning if your data is data secrets or client sensitive information or anything like that, and you do not know for sure that the model that you're using will not use this data for training, do not upload the data to that platform. Now, there's some data that there's no problem uploading to the platform because it's not really sensitive and you can still do that. Another way to do this, the right way to do this, is to obviously get a license level that does not train on your data. You can do this even with the regular $20 a month ChatGPT. There's a form you can fill up on the ChatGPT website, on the OpenAI website, and you can Google it and you can find it to ask them not to train on your data. And then you get a written confirmation in an email saying that they're not going to train on your data. That's number one. Number two is, let's say you have data that, and you don't have access to a tool like this and you don't want to risk the data, you can always declassify the data. So take your entire data sheet and divide it by 27.6, and then it's not the real numbers, and then do a finary replace to the customer's names, to client one, client two, client three, client four, do all the analysis you want, run the reports, do everything, because then it's data that is not really the real data. When you bring it back after you write the report and you're now in Google Docs or in Microsoft Word, do a finary replace again and change all the numbers back and all the names back to the original numbers. So that's another workaround. But all I'm saying is be careful and aware with what you do with sensitive data, because you might be exposing it to whichever platform you're uploading it to. That's it for today. Really hope you found this helpful. Have an awesome rest of your week.